And I want to welcome everybody to today's session. It's great to have you here. We're here with instructional designer Jamie Warren. Jamie is one of our two instructional designers here at Blue Ridge, and he's going to be talking to us today in our second of our workshops around user experience. So this UX for Educators is focused on applying UX to your courses, and I'm going to let Jamie take over from here. Thanks again for being on.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to try to talk slowly and stay focused on our objectives today. There is a link in the chat where this is a self-paced course that you can do at any point. There are interactives throughout, and feel free to just do this at your own pace. And you're welcome to follow along my screen. So kind of the idea, what we started last time. I'll give you a recap. And feel free to, if you've already watched the first part, feel free to, click the skip recap and just fast forward a little bit. But I'm going to go through just kind of backtrack a little bit to let you know how we got to where we are today, and just pick it up a little bit and hopefully fill in some of the gaps of what we left last time. So what we were focusing on last time, we were trying to define what user experience was and the key factors behind that. So it was casting a really wide net in terms of not even looking at through the lens of education, but just through the lens of our human experience of the design of the chairs around us and the walls that surround us, and kind of everything that's not in the natural world has a design to it. So as we go through, let me go ahead and preview the lesson here. So I'll start the course. So the idea is we're going to define what the user experience is, which we've already done. And today we're going to get more into the core principles of human-centered design, which is very similar, but we'll explain what that and how that connects later. We're going to get into the 4 principles of activity theory. I want to identify the key steps in task analysis and apply these principles through self-reflection. And so I'll ask you to kind of go into one of your courses and look through just really quick. And what's your first observation about how do we look through the lens of some of these theories that are largely based in research and learning theories. And so those are objectives. So let me just take you through these first couple slides a little quicker. So as we define what UX is, what I've loved about this for so many years is that it gives me an opportunity to be curious. I can go into a bookstore, a greenhouse, or just about anything, and I can see the design inherent in the thing, in the object, and it's suddenly I'm suddenly asking myself, okay, was this easy to use, or was it difficult to use? So it's a really good filter to kind of just observe the world with. That's what I really love about the study. And as educators, we get into more of an actual user interface design, where if you've ever built a PowerPoint, or if you're trying to design your course maybe from scratch in MyCourses, I mean, we're dealing with a lot more user interface elements as well. So kind of a quick story of how we got to today. Really, it's just there's a lot of events that happened, but between the ancient Romans with the idea of durability, functionality, and beauty, that was the base. That was really the first treatise on user experience and how we design things. Jump forward to 1970, we have the beginnings of human-computer interaction, which is really what we're going to talk about today in terms of what is task analysis, and how do we approach the steps to achieve a goal. And there's a lot of factors involved in that, but really, how should people interact with computers? And so how intuitive should that interaction be? And then bring us to today, where we're really looking at more from human-computer interaction up to the artificial intelligence age. So to define UX, the ergonomics of human system interaction, it's a riveting document. I've read most of it. I'm going to try to get through it all, but a person's perceptions and responses that result from the use or anticipated use of a product, system, or service. So we have this in everything that we use, whether it's a soda bottle or a new car. So as we're going through our everyday, we try to figure out how can we intuitively navigate through a system. What are these cues that helps us find whatever we're doing from a user's perspective. So and then there's some laws of UX that correspond to some very broad definitions of UX. So first of which, is Jacob's law, which was users spend most of the time on other sites, so that when they come to, I'm going to use MyCourses as kind of the anchor for all this, because that's the unified experience that all of our students have. And by and large, it looks this, all the courses look the same, but we have a lot of granular control as instructors to help them have a more personalized experience. And so if we find a really good looking course or a model course or something that we need to try to steal and try to emulate what that course is doing, as far as what is the message it's giving. Is it a wall of text that you're seeing, or is it a nice graphic that's going to kind of ease you into the content? So as we go through the consistency part of this, feel free to answer this question at your own pace. I'll move on to simplicity. This is Tesler's law. It said for any system, there's a certain amount of complexity which cannot be reduced. So you're going to have to get your content on the page somehow, and how you decide to chunk that out and to scaffold that information can have a big influence on your students. I'll just kind of go through this. All right, and feedback. This kind of fits in to a lot of different laws. I couldn't really pick just one, but it really comes back to how important timely feedback is for the student, and so they can know their progress and help them feel involved. And finally, accessibility. Which is a big discussion in itself. So it's just making sure that all users, no matter what their abilities are, they can access and benefit from the system. Okay, so that took about 10 minutes. That's about what I was hoping for. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into today's topic, and human-centered design. So when in the 1970s and 80s, when these computers came out, they were basically focused on a linear progression from here's your goal, here's the end objectives, here are the tasks that you need to do that. And each one of those, there was never a question of why are we doing this, or what does it mean to do this. It was very much it was very cut and dry. So even the very first computers that came out, they were, and Dan, I'm really glad you're here if you have any thoughts on this as well, because it's fascinating, and I'll be talking a little bit about programming and different types and how we set our tasks up. But the first computers had this it was just this it was called ed. It was short for editor. And so you type all day, and then you go home, you'd come back, and the next day the machine would be off and all your work was gone. So it was these little frustrations that started this guy, Don Norman. He was at the University of San Diego. He had real concerns about the relationships that humans would have with computers, and how can we bring that part of it back, in which so the idea of user experience became the principles didn't change, but the way we approached it did. And that was a really important shift, because as soon as we moved over to thinking about the human first, we found that the way we approach our tasks and objectives had a lot. It changed quite a bit. And so now I made this just so if you want to save the changes. So that was a big thing in computer systems, is just the ability to save your document. So thinking about the user experience and the interfaces that we have every day, so even that something like, do you want to save the changes dialog box? it's constantly being iterated. So we talk about the mistakes of past designs, and I'm thinking of some of the big were 3 Mile Island, where it was a nuclear meltdown, but it was caused by user error that was a result of the interface not being clear, and really all the multiple aviation crashes that have happened just because of pilot error, if they were confused by the interface. All these things taught lessons, and fortunate as educators, we're not in that kind of situation directly with the students, but we have to look closely at these causes and the what are the solutions. So it's only when things really go poorly that we can look back at them and figure out what the actual problem was. So where the whole idea of computer-centered design is to try to anticipate the needs of the users through every part of this. So Don Norman, I've got the document attached to this course, but there are really 4 of these. First of all, you got to focus on the people and their context in order to create things that are appropriate for them. And this is as we move from users to people to humanity, to we're always focused on the students here. So step 2, understand and solve the right problems, and understand what the root problem is. So it's we don't want to fix the symptom here. We want to go back as far as we can and find the root. And the third is everything is a system. We're never done we're always iterating and improving on our on this on the path of learning. And this is so as we do this iterative work, we need to take our time and try these small interventions and tweak just a little bit at a time to make sure we get a better result. So one of those things we're never done. Okay, so I'll ask you right now. So as we are listening to me ramble on about this, so let's put this put it in action here. So if where do you think you can just take yourself off mute and start to just contribute. What do you think the answers are here? So as far as the first one here, we start with small manageable changes and iterate based on feedback. Which one is that one? To the column on the right.
The small and simple interventions. Am I saying
Yeah,
that
right. Yeah, hopefully that one was obvious where I use the words small and simple twice. Okay, yeah, so identify the root causes of user frustrations.
Hey, Dan, I tried to unmute you. I don't know if it looks like you're good now.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a effort to unmute because the phone doesn't, I won't go into it all. I've got to push a lot of buttons to go on and off mute. So anyway, I'm on now. I'm here.
It sounds like you're having a poor user experience, but I'm sorry.
I have a poor user experience with my telephone right now. Yeah, so everything's pushed off to the left here. Unfortunately, I can't read what's going on the screen here.
Okay. Let me, that might be, does that help anything?
No, it actually split off to the right. Maybe I just got everything.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's a new layout with the sharing the screens, and so I'm not exactly sure what you're seeing. Okay, well, so involve users in the design process. That's really going to be which one right there? That probably the people-centered. And
right.
Identifying the root causes of the frustrations. That's a matter of understanding the right understanding and solving the right problem, and then considering how changes in one part of a system affect the parts. That's thinking of everything, how it's all interconnected. So I think that should be all right. Yeah. So Dan, I'm sorry you're not seeing this, but again, just follow that link in the chat, and you can kind of follow along with us. Yeah. So I've got a question now about which principle of these do you think is the most challenging to implement, and why? And really, this is a question for everyone. I'm just kind of open to ideas and starting a discussion on this. So out of these four principles?
I'll tell you what I've struggled with in my online course this semester is understanding the root causes of user frustration, that solving the right problem. Because we work, especially at the community college, we work with so many different kinds of students. And so depending on the course we're teaching, we may have varying levels of skill in the digital world and also just competency in the course that they're learning in. And so I think it, like, anticipating user needs and knowing how to make sure we're providing everything in a way that's easy for them to access and understand, it's challenging.
Yeah, and some things are in our control and some things are absolutely not.
Yeah.
And we cannot guarantee that it's going to be a clear path everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and working at a community college, we have a really just a wide diversity of needs and students here. So that's always wonder about the research, how do we make our learning activities more people-centered as well? That's the most challenging for me. Any other thoughts from anyone?
I feel like we run into the everything's a system problem pretty regularly too, because any kind of updates and any software then seems to kind of reverberate through other things, or like doing accessibility stuff. If you're relying on Word, you're also then relying on people having not just access to Word, but being able to have Word run on their computer and have it run correctly and have, it seems like at a lot of design stuff, the way it crosses over between systems, that updates and small changes can then have effects that reverberate through those in ways that you didn't think about. That seems to be a challenge I've seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're going to talk about mediation in the next slide, and that gets into a lot of what you're talking about between what happens between the subject and the object. Yeah. Some good thoughts. So Don Norman, if you're interested in anything UX, anything dealing with the design of everyday things, really, I recommend checking him out. Between him and Jacob Nielsen, they're definitely the grandfathers of user experience and design. So yeah, the goal is to produce a great product, one that is successful and customers love. I mean, that goes right back to Vitruvius when he was saying it needs to be durable and beautiful and functional. So moving out of human-centered design, that was the kind of the link between, let's stop using the word user and thinking of it as just a set of tasks to be done, to more of a user-centered approach. So that's kind of the terms that we're using going forward. So as we're talking about activity theory now, some of this will seem obvious, I guess, for lack of a better word, but it's important to kind of always remember those fundamentals of how we approach and why we approach things. So with activity, it is a structured framework. How can we distinguish an activity from something that's not an activity, and like understanding how technology plays a role in these processes. So it's a dynamic, transformative information between subjects and the world, and which includes psychological, social, and cultural dimensions. So as we go, the first concept we're going to talk about is an object-orientedness. This is where I'd love to hear your thoughts, Dan, about computer programming and how even the LMS that we use has object-oriented in it. So in Moodle, but so that's everything that we deal with in Moodle is going to be activity-based as we add tools, whether it's an external tool or something that's built in. So what we want to do is emphasize the activities that are directed towards that goal or object. So how we shape our content and how we build our learning activities, it needs to come from a place where there are clear objectives, where there's if someone's driving down the street and they're going too fast and they hit a speed bump, where does the blame lie? Is it on the sign? Is it because they're driving too fast? Is it the speed bump itself? Is it the road? So we're trying to see all sides of an action and why we tell them to do the things that we do. So three things that you can, that really benefit from thinking about this, is that enhanced engagement. The students will know what they're working towards, having an objective. They're a lot more likely to stay focused and invested if those objectives are clearly stated. The relevance, it helps them to connect the real world to the applications, to the activity, and that's that would have more investment from them as well. And then objectives that really allow you to give really precise feedback of the performance. So for if you have a course that you're teaching, think about it for a second. If it may be one that you have sort of you could have built it yourself, or you could have inherited it from another faculty. But so think about, just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes in a separate tab and navigate to one of your courses and look at one of your assignments. And if you don't have the objectives posted in your course, look at the syllabus and kind of how do you pinpoint and clarify those goals that you want your students to achieve. So maybe take 2 minutes and just come on back whenever you have kind of have an idea.
Well, I've made it a habit in my courses since the first year to put my outline with the objectives, aligns with course learning outcomes at the top of the page. So basically at the end of this unit, the student will be able to A, B, C, that sort of thing. And then it also says that how are we going to achieve those things is through the graded activities of a survey, quiz, assignments, discussion forum, or whatever is appropriate, labs. So every module has something at the top that tells you what's going to happen in that particular module.
Yeah, absolutely. And that speaks to a lot of the consistency and the simplicity of it. In having your objectives only put into a syllabus that's only posted to one place in the course, that's not a clear path. So I'm really glad to be seeing more of that, Dan, in how the objectives are posted front and center. Whatever you can do to make them clearer. It doesn't have to be a very elaborate formatted HTML, but just a simple bullet list is helpful. So yeah, great. Anyone else have a thought on
Yeah, this is Sarah. I'm looking at one of my modules that started this semester for ACA, and I'm realizing that the intro identifies learning objectives that are not included in any assignments. So one of my modules got past me without that clear alignment that I felt like I had in this course. So I need to go back and do a better job there. Yeah, it's important.
So you want to put the learning objectives in the assignment itself.
Well, I mean, I think that sometimes that can be really helpful, right? But like in this particular module, there's 4 student learning outcomes. One of them is to discover how to contact your instructors. I mean, it's ACA, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not finding that as part of any assignment in this whole module. Like there's no place in the module where it says, this is how you get in touch with me. Honestly, it's an outcome that's misplaced. It should be somewhere else in the course. So it might just be the organization of the learning outcome.
Right. Yeah. And again, just a little bit of just auditing that and trying to see it through that lens. I think if you can do one of those things per day, or either or whenever you feel that something is not quite lining up, or you're not getting the results you want, I think just looking at one of these principles could really just help change your perspective for that. So thanks. Yeah. So next, we're talking about the hierarchical structure of activity. Now this is going back to sort of the task oriented. How do we organize our task in a way that supports those objectives? And this, as far as how we break down complex activities, we can improve clarity by understanding those to the objectives. Again, help the student know where they are. And going to kind of be repeating this a little bit, but the student needs to know where they are and their progress in the course. A lot of times we really can't depend on the activity completion that comes in my courses. Sometimes it isn't accurate, and we actually hear a lot about that. You know, if students want to know that they've completed 100% of the course. So it's something that's it's a common thread. So, and it really helps you to focus on what's important there. So the next question, it might be in the similar vein, but think about how you structure activities. If you have a lesson that you're, how do you reflect that approach? What changes would you consider to align with this principle? So maybe take a minute and think about that one. Okay. Any thoughts?
I'm kind of thinking about in the assault course we've been working on, thinking about how to structure the assignment so that it relates back to the people who will actually be taking the course, which could be sort of a motivating factor of it. So we've got we want you to read this or watch this, what we want you to do with that information, and that we want you to do with the information. We're trying to connect back to how people could actually use that in their, normally it would be police in this specific one, but it could be others. How you could actually use this in your own work as sort of a motivating thing. So it relates it to them, but it also gives them, it also hopefully pulls on some motivation because it relates to something they would actually be doing. But thinking about it, the hierarchy there is almost kind of upside down, thinking like motivation, goals, and conditions. The motivation then is kind of tied in at the end. I guess you could do it at the beginning too. I don't know. I was just thinking through that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's interesting because again, we're not really looking at a linear process here. I mean, this is not, you know, you put in code and then this thing happens. We're more in kind of in a machine learning state where we're dealing with data and the motivations are different as we see that. Yeah, I always think about very generalized assignments and where there's like there's an accounting assignment where there's a lot of terminology and data, and then the assignment is give your thoughts on this paragraph. I mean, it's just there's a huge disconnect. What do you mean by thoughts? I don't need to think about this. I need to understand the concepts, and so that's part of it is really breaking down those steps of how do we separate each part of this so that it can all come together again at the end. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I was thinking about an assignment I used to give in my last teaching assignment, my last teaching appointment, where students were working through understanding specific concepts related to communication and leadership. And what I had them doing every couple of weeks was writing a paper based on what they were experiencing in the course and relating it to their own experience. So there was a lot of like contextual work happening, but the end goal of that was, so they had to write 5 of these through the course of the semester, but then their final was to take those 5 earlier drafts that had been graded and responded to and use them basically as the pre-writing for a final where they picked 3 larger topics from those papers. So everything built to that final. And the part that I liked about it was that I knew I knew how I set it up, and I knew I set them up to write this final that was going to be really easy for them to pull together. But what I really liked is when they realized that I had done that. Like they were so excited to know that they had already done the hardest part of the assignment, which was come up with the stuff. And then they're like, I can choose from all of this, you know? So the joy that comes from like, I've actually built my success already. that was just a really rewarding experience for me. And it came after years and years of having mostly disparate writing assignments, right? And so this was a really nice cumulative experience for them.
Yeah, that's a great example. Really having all the Legos in your box is, and that's the clearest path to to building something that you want to see. Yeah, I remember when I was teaching jazz improvisation, it was always that part of, well, everything can be broken down into these little motives, little elements of the language, and so putting those together became kind of a similar thing when you realize that I've already given you the final exam. All you need to do is just put it together. So,
Yeah, it's like a Karate Kid moment, right? We're gonna paint the fence and wax the car and all the stuff.
yeah, wax on, it's important.
I'm
Yeah.
glad that you laughed at that, Dan. It was a big moment in my life as a kid.
I hope we all have the Karate Kid moments at some point. Yeah. Okay, so the third one we're moving on to is mediation. So this will kind of tie into what we were talking about earlier with these barriers not necessarily a barrier. It's just something that's it's going to be the connecting thread between what the subject does and what the object requires. And mediation is how those tools and society and culture, how they influence that and how we interact with it. So this principle will really help to this idea that called push versus pull learning. We've looked at online learning for a lot of years as more of a repository, a filing cabinet for a lot of documents, and we just continually push long videos. We push documents towards them. We read, and it's always, and they don't have a lot of chance to pull and lean forward into the content. And so we're finding tools and technologies that help us do that by improving the collaboration in even the built-in tools in MyCourses, like the discussion platforms and some of the collaborative software that we have, like WooClap, and some of the other like Figma, and I'm drawing a blank, Sarah. Some of the other collaboration software, Flipgrid, and now which we're using ScreenPal with.
ScreenPal, right?
So these things can foster, help students just get to know each other a little bit, and we move. A big part of the relevance in all this is when like an instructor brings in someone from the community, like an expert in a subject matter, and they make that gap between what's an object in the real world and what's in the subject's head, and how they connect those two. So that's my next question. So how do you currently use tools? What tools do you use and resources to help that mediation?
Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm wondering, in your classes, would you consider you're using CompTIA, right?
I am.
Would you consider that
So-
to be a tool for mediating learning here?
From a content standpoint, I think that the approach of what they offer in terms of how, what the information is itself, just the content itself, is a lot more spot on for the preparation of the CompTIA certification exams. Having said that, to answer more of your question as far as what tools would I use, unfortunately, I probably just lean on what I know. I do the best I can. Like for instance, there's already so much activity as far as time on task that's a part of the CompTIA material, that there really isn't a lot of opportunities for me to put a lot in there. but I am kind of repeating week to week a forum and a written assignment. But I do try to at least ask a thought-provoking question that's a little more not just regurgitating the information, but did you kind of synthesize it? Like by way of example, if this is a CompTIA, one of the courses is for support and service, desktop support type stuff. And if you're trying to learn about, let's say, how a printer works and something doesn't work, the kind of questions that I pose in a forum are, okay, so the printer doesn't work. What are your steps? And there are some steps laid out in the content from CompTIA, but at the same time, there's, they really kind of have to think it through and have a conversation about it. So I'm hoping that some of that is not just, checking the box. Yes, I know, that, I could be out of toner or that kind of thing. So, back to the point is that I try to come up with something that at least makes them think a little bit in order to be able to answer the question or have something to add to the discussion. So it's as far as the tools, since you're talking about specifically what tools and resources, that's one of the reasons I'm trying to tune into things like this, is so that I can up my game and find out what else is available. I guess this is a little more on the theoretical side, but still,
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Yeah, and I've kind of been stuck in the abstract for a bit, and having some real conversations about it, it brings it down to planet Earth for me. So I do appreciate that. Yeah. So just in terms of, yeah, and that's exactly it. I mean, CompTIA is an external tool that has a lot of traction, and it says there's a lot of resources that you don't have to build. So a lot of things, since CompTIA is also the organization that they take their tests through, it's a very direct route that the students have. Just kind of get to know the company. So, yeah. So
yeah,
it's
I think what they have. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to make a quick comment on it. Looking through, just so I didn't really actually bring in the context of what CompTIA is. It's not just a bunch of reading. There's a lot of multimedia. There's videos. There's quite a bit of hands-on labs, and that was one of the main reasons that I decided to move over to that particular curriculum, is because, it's real life. They're actually, doing a virtual machine, doing this, that, and the other thing, typing in and interacting. Whereas if it's just a book, even just a video, sometimes you're just kind of absorbing, you're not actually doing. And so that's one of the advantages, I think, and the improvements that have been made by moving into that CompTIA curriculum that we're now using.
Absolutely, yeah, and those are resources that we really can't recreate here. We don't have the ability to do all that, and it's which that kind of transitions into the next one, how we internalize versus externalize. I have a platter for a hard drive here. I'm not sure I meant to use that image as the perfect metaphor. So this is the internal hard drive, how information is coded, but there's also what's the practice of that. And so how we were talking about with online labs with CompTIA. I mean, that really is, that kind of says it for me, because with that dynamic relationship between what you're learning and how you practice it, that fits in pretty well for me, because the whole idea of internalizing knowledge, it has to do with active learning. And when they're engaged in stuff like that, like solving the problems, and it's always liked back to CompTIA just a bit. I've done some of those labs, and I always liked how there's, you can see your machines, but on the right, there's a very clear list of steps that you need to take. And generally, if there's any problems during the activity, you can almost always self-correct by rebooting the lab. And so if you have some downtime, it's almost never too long. So externalization activities. So that's, we're talking about a practice and a theory, really at the very core of it. So last question here. So if you can reinvent, this is kind of a big question, but if you can reinvent how students learn and express their knowledge, what innovative approaches would you take? And just kind of feel free to think big. How do we even further bridge that gap between the practice and the theory?
I'm really interested in AI and how far, there are a lot of problems with it, obviously, but with using AI, how much further we can go, students can go with their learning. I'm thinking specifically, I've been recently giving AI an identity when I work with it. So you are now John Dewey. Please talk to me about how growth works in education. And the processes of working with AI, you can now create essays pretty easily. So as an educational tool and academia, like how can we use AI to push students to go further and do more complicated and interesting things? Specifically, how can you do that in sort of an interdisciplinary fashion? So can you learn Spanish and philosophy at the same time in a really integrated way? So you have a Spanish class and you have a philosophy class. Can you then have an identity in an AI where you work through learning those two things together so that neurologically you have more to hang that on and there's more context for all of it? And how is it that we can push to have a more interdisciplinary cross approach to all of these things? And how then could they show that knowledge at the end? So could you have a project then that went across multiple classes in some way? And the grading nightmare, of course, but if we're thinking big here, those ways of creating complex learning across different domains, and then the artifacts that could be produced out of that. Can you then write me a paper in Spanish about Kierkegaard's idea of deontology or whatever? Like if you have those two separate bodies of knowledge, the process of putting those in context and communication with each other gives you a lot of neurological room to hang that on.
Yeah, that's an excellent point there. Yeah. Yeah. We see some crossover, some classes that they're sort of designed from the ground up. I remember taking a religion and a music class it was focused on music really from the 1400s on, and it really collaborated those two subjects really well together. Yeah, cool. Anyone else?
Well, in our situation with IT, I find that it's sort of just incidental, or it's not necessarily intentional, but there's significant overlap. If a student is taking one of my courses and they're also taking one of Tanya's courses, necessarily there's some occasionally I'll hear a student say, "Oh, I just heard about that in the other class," so there is some reinforcement. And like I said, it's not like it's a planned situation like you brought up, Wes, as far as various courses all covering or having dovetail into one another for an assignment or a project. But it just tends to be that way in IT a little more naturally.
Indeed. Right. Anybody else? No. Okay. Well, all right. So I kind of let's just recap here for activity theory, and about one more little module to do. We're about 10 minutes out. So real quick, we'll just kind of categorize these, and you can just shout that out as soon as to what you think. Let's sort these principles into these activities into the principles here. So writing reflections after lessons. Where do you think that would go?
I think that's internalization and externalization.
Yeah, it'd be part of the external. Yep, developing a science project. And these are vague on purpose. I know there's a lot of ways you can look at this. We're talking about kind of what is the kind of the core idea here.
Would that be hierarchical structure of activities?
It can be. Really what we're focusing on is the object here. So in this case, if we're looking at an action word like develop or write, it would go into object orientedness, because it's essentially an instruction to that's your goal. So it's like a marketing campaign. It's pointing directly towards that action. So this would be.
Okay. I think the word kind of made me think a little more that it was a little more of a complex and not a single.
Yeah, and I think you could make the argument that either any of these can fit into any category. I think it's just
Right.
if we looking at what is the activity, it kind of makes sense in a minute. So like a marketing campaign, that's an object that we would go towards. So involving community expertise. What about that one?
Hmm.
Is it mediation?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. And incorporating multimedia resources.
I think that's another mediation.
It is. Oh, yeah. Facilitate discussions.
Is that mediation again?
I believe so. All right. Yeah. So planning a course syllabus.
Well, if we're thinking about like, what's the plan for the semester, if we're talking about that specific part of the syllabus, then that would be hierarchical structure of activities, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because that's where we start getting into the steps
Yeah.
of what the syllabus, what's in the
What
syllabus.
builds to what, yeah.
Yeah. So write a research paper.
Externalizing your knowledge? Or is that an object because you're writing the paper?
Again, it could be either one. There really is no wrong answer. I put it in object oriented, and this only because it was an action word. So implementing a new learning management system.
I don't want to think about that.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
I absolutely. Yeah. So I think that I should have left that one out because that's not something a teacher can exactly do. But the idea is it's still that middle, that piece of technology that goes in the middle. So I would classify it as mediation. But again, I agree that does not exist. That does not belong here. So anyway, break down curriculum goals.
That'd be hierarchical. Like, yeah, cool.
Yeah. Write a lesson plan. We're almost done with these.
I would say hierarchical again.
Yeah, I would say that too. Yeah. Practicing math problems. And this could be individually or with a group.
Would it be externalization because you're actively doing it?
Yeah, that's what I would say. Oh, okay, that's weird. Okay, discuss concepts in study groups.
Would it be mediation?
It could be. I think the idea would be to so students can, how do they articulate themselves, or how do they articulate their thoughts in that kind of a feedback loop. I put this under internal and external because it kind of, I see it as an externalization, but again, so in designing a mobile application, that would, I think that would definitely go into object. I think this might be the last one. Language practiced individually, moving into pairs.
Another internal and externalization.
Yeah. I think anytime you see that you see the word practice or theory, or collaboration. So all right, we got all this right. Nice work. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the last one. We're running a little short on time, but we'll get through this. So this is a really in a similar vibe. There's this graphic came from the Interaction Design Foundation. There are 4 concepts to it. I kind of chopped it up a little bit, and I wanted to talk about activity theory and task analysis through this. The jobs to be done is an important step, but it is really more of a zooming out as a maybe an institutional learning objective might be. So we focus more on the idea of the theory of activity and task analysis. And activity-based design is really why we're here. So we're talking about that. So so as we go into task analysis, this is just one part of what we would call human-centered design. It's really just one cog in the wheel there. But so it's how do we and a lot of how the hierarchical analysis would be laid out. You can do the same here. So when you determine the goal and the tasks that a person needs to do, has strengths and weaknesses, and it's important to kind of think of this as designers and as educators when we think about a series of tasks to be done in a particular order. We can help to see the gaps and how we can make this better, and that really helps to kind of shine a flashlight on our process. Some of the weaknesses we have, it's really task oriented. So sometimes it's a little hard to think about what maybe some of the cultural implications or maybe the emotional states and particularly one of the weaknesses is that it can limit innovation because we're kind of relying on patterns that have already been set. And so I've got a clip here. It's less than a minute. I'm gonna go ahead and play it because well, it's Bryan Cranston and it's Malcolm in the Middle. You may recognize this, but I don't think we'll need sounds. You can pretty much tell what's going on. That just says it all for me. That's the answer to everything. Not only to how we approach education, but just being an adult. It happens almost daily. It took a minute and I just really looked through this, watched this video a couple of times, and I just broke down what was it that Hal was trying to do in this video? What was his task? You know, obviously the task was changing the light bulb. And now what was the intended outcome? Did he achieve that? I wanted to think that eventually he did, but my favorite part of that video was that he had his entire engine ripped out of his car, and the fact that he already had a mount to do all this with it. It's kind of, we have these tools that are it's like using an elephant to crush a walnut, but they can really throw us off so far off task. So when he starts to gather his tools, you know, he realizes that he's not going to need a light bulb, but he needs a screwdriver and a ladder. And so the tools that he needs keeps growing as we have add tools to the LMS, as we add all these other layers to our experience here. And when he's encountering obstacles, so how does his focus shift from that? So it's not really just about task management, but it's really about, so his task was clearly defined, but the tools in the environment added this unnecessary complexity to the whole thing. So as he started to fix it, you know, does this reflect on his problem solving approach, or is this more of an environmental thing? You can tell by the end of the clip, he's just really frustrated, and in his mind he's still going after that original objective, but his wife would never know that. So, and the final outcome is that he's just frustrated and no one's happy. So that's kind of just really fleshes all that out. So in the last 2 minutes, I want to talk real quickly about sort of the idea of a classical programming versus machine learning. As we're going through tasks and we see a series of steps. So with classical programming, I mean, we have it is a very clear and explicit instructions, and that we know what we want to tell the computer to do. So sometimes we have well-defined problems like changing the light bulb. where the rules are stable. So, but as we approach more of a machine learning and how AI builds, we deal more with the data and how it stacks up. And how the data can, the results can change based on the inputs. And that's getting into a lot of what we talk about with AI. There's an article here at the bottom from Medium. I recommend looking at it just because it's a lot more articulate than I'm describing this, but I recommend reading it because it ties in pretty closely to the idea of task analysis. And when we're creating a new activity or revising an old one, it's always good to think of it through that perspective. And finally, there's a document here, so that's you feel free to download that. It's just it kind of recaps what we said and how you can has some resources there. So I have 3 o'clock. I'm gonna stop sharing, and welcome any other questions or discussions of any part of that. So thank you.
Yeah, there's no easy task to ask you to talk to us about everything you've learned. It's like, tell us everything you've learned about user experience, Jamie, in, less than an hour. But we really appreciate you taking time to walk us through some of the bigger concepts and then also bring it down to earth for us so that we could directly apply them. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. And